Hello, and welcome to another episode of Super Data Brothers. I am Ryan Dolly. Eric won't be joining us today, unfortunately. He has a doctor's appointment he had to attend, but I'm thrilled that you are with us now for the very first episode of Super Data Brothers Season 4. And have we got a good one for you today? I'm going to be joined by Andrew Madson in just a second to talk about all the cool stuff that's going on in data and AI right now, and there's a lot to talk about. So we're going to get into that and mix it up with Andrew in a second. We are, of course, debuting a new show format today. So for season 4, we're going to do a couple things a little different. If you're one of our fans, and I see Michael, good to have you here, man. It's been a while since we've done this, so it's awesome to see some of our regulars joining in. Michael, of course, watching us live on YouTube, left a comment on the YouTube chat. And listen, if this is your first time here, this is a live show. So if you leave a question, a comment, a piece of feedback in the chat, I am going to ask it to Andrew. I'm going to address it myself. Think of this as more of a Twitch stream and less of a boring ass webinar that you're used to watching in the tech field. Okay, so let's keep it lively and keep it moving with the comments in the chat. If you let me know where you're watching from, I will shout you out and all of that good stuff. So Andrew's going to be joining us in a second. We got 2 new segments, okay? We're going to do a hero of data. So each episode this season, we will be talking about someone who contributed to our field who you should know. We're going to kick that off today, and then we're going to talk about some news items before we go to the general interview with Andrew. Of course, Andrew will be joining me for those 2 segments, and so I'm about to bring him on, but listen, before I do, I have to thank today's sponsor. That's right. Super Data Brothers Season 4 is sponsored by Good Data. Good Data is, of course, a vendor on the Gartner Magic Quadrant for Analytics and Business Intelligence, which you can get your free copy of the report by going to the URL that you see on the screen here. But, Good Data does a lot more than just BI. They're thought of as a BI tool, but there's a lot to it. And the most recent version or announcement from Good Data is the launch of the Decision Intelligence platform. So this is really taking AI in BI and analytics to the next level, where you can create agent personas that can do different tasks in data. So yeah, it's a Q&A for your end users, but it can do object classification tasks. It can do all sorts of stuff. And you can really fine tune them. So you can have, say, an AI data assistant that you expose in your application that uses your language, that has the tone of voice that you want, and that has the capabilities related to data that you want to provide to your end users. So check it out at gooddata.com. And we want to thank them for sponsoring this season. One last shout out. We want to give a shout out to Ugochi watching from the UK. Hey, thanks for watching. It's good to have you here. I was just in the UK. In fact, Andrew and I were just there last week for the Big Data London conference. And so I had a great time. And let's bring Andrew onto the show to kick things off. Andrew, how's it going, man?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So we were both at the Big Data London conference last year. What do you think of that conference? Or last year? I was there last year. I was also there last week. What do you think of that conference?
I really like it. I think it has a more relaxed vibe than maybe Snowflake and Databricks. All are good, but I really like the difference of who attends. You get to see some different vendors, different attendees. It's a really great hang.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the few conferences that I think draws a lot of big names in the data world, right? So it's really cool to see people there, catch up with friends. It's really one of my favorites. It's like that one, Day-to-Day Texas. I'm a fan of Data Council too. But those are to me, those are the 3 that I really look forward to. The other ones are great, right? Going to Snowflake or Databricks is awesome, but these ones are every year there's a lot of fresh voices and that sort of thing. So it's really exciting. Before we dive into the different sections, for our audience, why don't you give a quick introduction to who you are and what your background is?
Yeah, so Andrew Madson, currently head of DevRel at Fivetran. Worked in DevRel not too long, just a couple of years. Previous to that, I was leading data teams at a bunch of different places, mostly in financial services.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for joining us here today. So why don't we kick things off? Let's talk about our our first news segment. This is our Heroes of Data segment. So today we're going to be talking about Edgar F. Codd. Whether you know it or not, the work of Edgar Codd, if you work in data, is so foundational to what you do that we had to start off with Codd for the very first Heroes of Data section. So, every time you write a SQL query, you're using the ideas of Edward Codd. This guy is the father of the relational database, and his work powers pretty much everything we do. So Edgar Codd was not born into tech royalty. In fact, there was no tech royalty when Edgar Codd was born. He grew up in England. He served as a pilot in the Royal Air Force in World War II. And this is one of my favorite things about this generation of technologists is a lot of them have a background in the military, and then they go on to found all sorts of foundational technologies that we use today. He earned his doctorate in computer science at the University of Michigan, and then spent a huge chunk of his career at IBM. And so why do we remember Codd today? Why is it so important? Well, before Codd's work, databases were highly hierarchical. They were structured like trees. And if you wanted to find, say, all customers who bought a specific product, you had to write custom code, and you had to know like the indexes and really write like highly custom code to traverse the structures of the databases. Everything was really brittle. It was tied to physical storage, and it was just not scalable. And that's where Codd comes in. In 1970, he publishes this paper, A Relational Model of Data for Large Shared Data Banks. And this paper is the paper that kicks off really our industry. And so instead of tying data to how it's stored, he describes things that should be very familiar to you: tables, columns, rows. All of that comes out of the work of Codd. And the idea of having a query language that sits on top of it that's generalizable. So you don't have to really get deep into the weeds of where the data is. You can provide a simple instruction set, and it can pull the data out of the tables. So everything that we do, SQL, right, Oracle, Postgres, Snowflake, none of this exists without Codd. He also came up with the idea of normalization. This is a term that drives me crazy nowadays because everybody uses it backwards, right? When they say normalize, they really mean denormalize, but I won't dive too deep into that. But this is really another foundational idea behind all databases. And so he came up with the first three normal forms himself, and then he worked with Raymond Boyce for the Boyce-Codd normal forms that expanded it into the additional ones. And I'm curious, Andrew, did you study computer science, or what is your educational background?
I have an MBA and then a master's in data science. So
Okay.
Tangential to computer science.
Did you have to learn at any point, like the normalization and go through the normal forms as part of your education? Because I did, and I found that like brain busting.
100%. In fact, I just went through it the other day to remind myself what all the forms are.
Did you really? Do you have
Yeah.
a favorite form? Is there one that really spoke to you?
Third normal form.
3NF, that's the classic. That's really where all the action is.
That's right.
I realized, I can't remember who I was talking to someone, and they were talking about how a lot of people today are not, people who work in data didn't necessarily learn the normal forms as part of their education, which, I'm of the generation, at least, where like there was no analytics to study when I was younger, right? So if you wanted to get into data, all there was to study was like database. Like that was the class you took. That was the one class back in 2008 when I was studying IT. At least where I was studying, right? That was really the one data related class that you could study. Everything else was more computer science. And so I remember the normal forms well, and the test that we had a whole test, actually, just the normal forms. It was a huge part of our final grade. So what was Edgar Codd's career like? Well, he publishes this paper. What's really interesting is that he was at IBM at the time, and IBM really dragged their feet because they had a suite of profitable database products that were based on the old way of doing databases. And so while this is happening, this guy you may have heard of named Larry Ellison reads Codd's paper and then beats IBM to market with the first, at least the first commercially successful like operational transactional database at Oracle. And so this is a classic scenario. You look in the 1970s, like the story of the 70s is these brilliant researchers at places like IBM and Hewlett Packard and Xerox creating these new technologies. But the the companies they work for were not successful in commercializing them, and instead we have Oracle and Microsoft and all these other firms, and that's what happened with Edgar Codd's research as well. Um, he did end up leaving IBM, so he started his own consultancy. He very famously published Codd's 12 rules for what counts as a relational database, and was quite a stickler. You know, like if it doesn't meet these 12 things, it's not a relational database. And so, you know, why does COD matter today? His principles are in everything you do as a data practitioner. Even, you know, even something like NoSQL is a reaction to COD's work. So even if you're working in a SQL-less data environment, it's still a reaction to what COD did for us. And so that's really how powerful his vision is. He didn't just like invent one database model. He defined how to think about data. And so that's why we had to have him as the first hero of data here on Super Data Brothers Season 4. I see some comments here. So we've got Michael Dunphy points out Agenometry has a really good video called The Birth of SQL in the Relational Database on YouTube. Highly recommended. You know, it has suggested that video to me, Michael, and I've never clicked it. So now I will go and view it. And I see we've got Ramona Truta in the audience. Hey, Ramona, how's it going? Past Super Data Brothers guest. And then Michael Dunphy says, classic innovator's dilemma. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So is there, you know, anything you'd want to add to that overview of COD, Andrew, before we move on to the news?
No, I think that was really good. It's constantly, I feel like in data, it's the same pattern over and over again where we're trying to separate things but maintain their integrity as like COD separated physical and logical modeling, but we still want to maintain that integrity. And then later on, right, we start separating compute and storage. We're always separating these things, but then we want to maintain their integrity but separately. So COD's such a great example of that.
Yeah, and he's really just one of the true pioneers of the field, like without which we, you know, it's hard to imagine what form data would take if it weren't for COD's work. All right, so let's move on to the news of the week. So this was all the talk I thought of Big Data London was the announcement of Snowflake and partners, you know, Tableau, who else? Omni, a number of other ones announced the Open Semantic Exchange. So this is really the idea behind this is we've been, for a long time, people have been saying, wouldn't it be great if there was some sort of universal semantic layer? It's such a problem we have that every BI tool has its own semantic layer, and now all the database vendors are adding their own semantic layers. Wouldn't it be great if there was just some universal semantic language? And I think that's what this is really about, is creating that. And so if you look at, you know, you can go to the press release and check it out. If you look at the list of people who are already members, it's a pretty good list of vendors, I would say, that are committed to backing this. Now, this is not the first time someone's tried this. There was an open source semantic layer project that I was briefly involved with in 2020 that I don't think ended up going anywhere. In fact, I can't even remember what it was called at this point. But this one seems to have some major industry backing. So, you know, why don't we think about that for a little bit, Andrew? Like, what do you see? How do you see the semantic layer fitting into the data stack at this point?
I think there's a few challenges. One, everybody defines semantic layer differently, which is a challenge. And often vendors are defining it in a way that aligns with their capabilities, which makes sense, but it creates confusion in the industry. But I think Snowflake is trying to introduce a standard. I think it's YAML based, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly. But I think it will be helpful because if you can, like the idea behind a semantic layer and how it interacts and enables the business makes a lot of sense. But I think it's going to be imperative for LLMs. You know, you can't really have effective AI if you don't have a common ontology. And so I think this is a really smart move from Snowflake. Yet to be seen how it'll play out. But I think having a semantic layer standard introduced will be very helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And this is one of those things. One of the big questions in the debates in data lately has been, well, where should the semantic layer fit? And
Hmm.
everybody has argued, oh, it should fit in my layer of the stack, right? If you're a BI person, you say I should be in BI. I'm a BI person. I have lots of arguments I can make for why it should be in BI, but I recognize that the database people have their arguments for why it should be
Hmm.
in the database, right? And there are valid arguments on both sides. I'm interested to see how all this plays out, right? Like, will people really adopt this standard, and does it, it's just a standard, right? So it still could be the case that, well, we've adopted the standard, but we think you should deploy it within our semantic layer technology in the database versus our semantic layer technology in the BI layer. It's not like this is a piece of software, right? This is just an interoperability standard, is based on YAML, is my understanding. And so we'll have to see how it all shakes out. But this is really one of those things that it's interesting to see Snowflake be the first mover on this as well. And kind of the highlight or the headline sponsor of the new standard. So we'll have to see how it shakes out. I am. What's your opinion on that? Like, if someone comes to you and says, "Oh, where should the semantic layer be?" What would you tell them?
I think I think it honestly depends on the company. In my opinion, there's not a one size fits all. Just like anything, it's when I go in and I'm looking at an architecture and figuring out like how they're using it and what tools they have available to them. Like if they're on a Microsoft stack and they're using Fabric and Power BI, I'm more prone to say, hey, the semantic layer probably needs to live in the BI realm.
Yeah.
But if they don't have that, it can make a lot of sense to have it in the transformation or the database layer. Honestly, it really just depends. Just having something set up, I think, is more important.
Yeah. Is this like a don't let perfect be the enemy of the good sort of situation?
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I was thinking about with this, the OSI that Snowflake launched is that at scale was not a partner in that, which was a
Yeah.
big surprise to me because when I think semantic layer, usually I'm thinking at scale, and they were noticeably absent as a launch partner.
Yeah. And unless I'm mistaken, Cube is a partner, right?
Cube
I
is a
think
partner.
right. So I mean, if you think about kind of the semantic layer first vendors in the space, those are the two. Like,
Hmm.
lots of people have a semantic layer. Good Data, we have one. It's open. You can use it with other tools, but we don't lead with that. We kind of lead with the BI apps features, right? Whereas at scale and Cube, like that's it. The whole vision behind those companies initially was, we're not going to have a front end. We're going to be a headless semantic layer. And to see one of them part of it and the other not, I hadn't really thought about that, Andrew. But you're right. Like, to not see at scale on there is quite interesting. Yeah. We do have a couple comments here. I'm trying to figure out who this is. So the StreamYard integration, of course, stinks with LinkedIn, and so I'm trying to pull this person's name, but LinkedIn's not cooperating with me. So LinkedIn user says, "Throw it in your iceberg catalog." Exactly, right. Put it wherever it makes the most sense. And then yeah, and then we have smiley face. Yes, put in your iceberg catalog. I think, Andrew, is the real lesson, like, use the one you have right now, and then we can sort this out later.
Yeah, I think the hard work of building a semantic layer and getting that common ontology is, I mean, I think the real value, in my opinion, of leading data teams is like it actually forces you to try to break down silos or identify mismatches in definitions and how data is being used. So, regardless of where the semantic layer lives, just going through that exercise is insanely helpful.
Yeah, it really does force you to do that. I mean, that's ultimately, like, in many ways, it's one of those situations where uh, choosing to implement a piece of technology forces you to do operational and cultural things that you should have done anyway. And I often tell people that, like, I get asked a lot of times, should I change to a different BI tool? And my honest answer is usually, well, if you can use changing, if the only way to force the changes in your ways of working is to acquire a new tool, then go for it. Otherwise, you're gonna get a lot more benefit from changing the way you do BI than you are just by
Mm,
buying a new tool. And
exactly.
so it may be one of those situations.
It's like a treadmill. Buying a treadmill doesn't get you in shape. And we've all seen tons of pictures, and we may even have them in our homes of treadmills just covered in clothes and a bunch of crap. Because
Yeah,
we didn't change our behavior, right? The tool didn't fix the actual underlying problem, and that's the same with technology.
exactly. Exactly. All right. So moving on, we've got this is, a lot of our audience is BI people. This is kind of an interesting shift, I would say, in Power BI and Microsoft strategy. And it's really just the most recent release of Power BI now turns Copilot on by default. So most users will get Copilot as the default experience instead of a kind of secondary opt-in experience. Microsoft is apparently confident enough in what Copilot does in Power BI that they feel that it's time to bring it into the spotlight and say, hey, this is a major part of our application, not a sideshow. And so, for those of you who haven't used Copilot in Power BI, I haven't used it much myself. It's too bad Eric can't join us because he has. He would be able to tell us all about it. But I think in a lot of ways, the way in which it's probably most helpful is it can help you write DAX. And at the end of the day, learning how to write DAX is one of the main barriers, I think, in people from being good at Power BI and great at Power BI is that. And that is, in my mind, the best use in a lot of ways for these chat interfaces in BI right now is to actually help you with the hard parts of either the logic, metric creation or content creation. um, when it comes to actually answering end user questions, I think really what Microsoft has in Copilot is not that, right? It's really more geared towards the producers and helping them be more effective. And so we'll see how this rolls out. I don't. Have you used Power BI Copilot at all?
No, I haven't. But
Yeah.
your thought on it, Copilot being able to help you write DAX. My initial reaction is like, what a waste of brain power. It's
Yeah.
like you have to learn a new language to get an answer. It seems to me like a meaningless friction.
Yeah.
That's my initial reaction to that. It's like, why do I need to learn a new language to get like, why can't I just put my brain power to the critical thinking and driving business, and instead of having to learn this? And I know DAX fairly well, and but just hearing you say that, I'm like, oh yeah, that is kind of dumb that you have to learn
Yeah.
something specific to this that really has nothing to do with the business problem or the value.
Exactly, exactly. And DAX itself, I mean, it's a solution. It was really a solution in search of a problem, right? We had
Mhm.
MDX that existed, and MDX was hard to learn, and
Yep.
it was very powerful. I got really good at it for like a year, and now I barely remember it at all anymore. But and I know that Microsoft came along and they're like, well, let's make something with the power of MDX, but that's easier to use. And I think what really happened really quickly is they just replaced MDX with like another iteration of MDX.
Yep.
It's still hard for people to use. It still doesn't. It didn't catch on, in the way that I think they had hoped when they initially developed it. That we'll give people this multidimensional language, but it'll be as easy to learn as SQL, and that didn't happen. And so
No.
you're really right. And I wonder if there is kind of look, the most obvious thing you can do with these large language models in a lot of tools is, the second L is language. So let's have an assistant with the coding part of our applications, right? And that's clearly what Microsoft is viewing as one of the main benefits here. I know good data, all our platform is all code based, so it's a similar
Mhm.
thing, right? Like if we can teach an AI assistant and we have to help you produce YAML definitions for dashboards, like that's an obvious win for people who are in that situation. But that's not where the greatest value is. The greatest value will be if and when AI can relieve us of this kind of thing. And so now you can just focus on the business value and that sort of thing rather than having to worry about the DAX to begin with. Um,
Exactly. I mean, we're all so busy, and there's much more work to be done than any of us can do. And so I'm incredibly sensitive for myself and my teams about administrative overhead, like dumb meetings that we shouldn't be a part of, or like Jira boards that just take up so much time but don't actually drive value. And sometimes languages can be the same way, where it's like, is it just administrative overhead that doesn't actually drive any value for anyone other than you just have to know it? And can we eliminate that in some way? So and some languages aren't like that, where it's like actually knowing the language helps you understand the underlying logic and actually drive value, because the logic's incredibly important. And sometimes it's just not valuable at all, and it's really just wasting your time and energy and keeping you from doing more important things.
yeah, absolutely. All right, and the last news item we want to talk about today. This should be something maybe you can help shed some light on for us, Andrew. Is Fivetran buys Tobiko. So you have been at head of DevRel at Tobiko before Fivetran. Obviously, you moved along with the acquisition. Can you just tell us a little bit about the acquisition and why it makes sense for Fivetran to make this investment?
Yeah, and this is my opinion. I should probably read the Fivetran press release. It probably says something similar. But if you think about what Fivetran's doing, so initially they bought, well, so initially they're doing integration, right? They're doing ingestion and have a suite of connectors, and then a connector software development kit so you can build your own custom. So they can essentially get data from anywhere. Then on the back end, they acquired Census. So then they can do reverse ETL back into whatever. So what's in the messy middle is transformation. So now they've always been, not always, they've been partnered with DBT for a long time, and I believe Coalesce as well, and they still are. So they've been doing transformation, but I think they're doubling down on their ability to do transformation, continuing those partnerships with DBT and Coalesce, but being able to really throw their own engineering resources at that transformation. So now they should have a end-to-end pipeline experience from ingestion, transformation to reverse ETL.
I think it makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I see happening in the industry right now, and I'm curious if you agree, but it seems obvious that there was this predicted consolidation of the modern data stack forever. I mean,
Yeah.
going back 3 or 4 years, and now I think it's really in full swing. So we're kind of looking at a constellation of features that are coalescing around different vendors, and it almost seems like we're heading into a world where maybe there's 5 or 6 or 8 people who are trying to compete in kind of the full stack, full data stack vendor. Snowflake and Databricks are obvious, and you've got the
Mm.
you know the legacy enterprise players, the Microsofts and even Oracles of the world who might be trying to do that. But then you're going to see this happen with a lot of the independent players, where it's going to become a hey, in order to compete with this full stack, we need to, almost like a form like Voltron sort of thing into to become full stack themselves. So it makes perfect sense for Fivetran to go ahead and do something like this. It just seems we're in that consolidation phase of the data industry, which hopefully means that maybe 3 or 4 years down the road, we will see the next great innovation wave of smaller companies who are coming up with a different approach in the same way these modern data stack companies had a different approach compared to what we were doing in kind of the big data era, right? Um,
Exactly. Thinking about that administrative overhead, when I was the interim field chief data officer for Dremio, and I'd go around and meet with all these companies and data executives about their strategy. And even if there were tools that were better at some capabilities than some of the larger tools out there, like Snowflake or Databricks, but the tools are smaller, like that administrative overhead wasn't compelling enough to get off of the ease of just being fully integrated in Snowflake or Databricks and overcoming that friction. So I think right now we're seeing a lot of that, where companies that built out the modern data stack and tried to implement it, there's a lot of complexity in orchestrating all of those parts. So I think there's been a big opportunity of companies trying to stay competitive, and they're like, okay, we'll bring it in and we'll just try to do everything as good as we can, end to end. And to stay
yeah,
competitive, you kind of have to do that.
And I think too, you see, we've reached the stage of maturity with a lot of these companies where, they really need to start selling to the enterprise and going into the enterprise. Like here in the Detroit area, this is an enterprise focused economy. So, we don't have a a lot of local employers who are willing to roll their own data stack. We're going to buy the best in breed for all 7 layers of the stack and then stitch it together ourselves. That works in certain industries, certain geographies, when you have access to the talent and you're willing to for you, the administrative overhead is worth it to get the best tool for every point in the
Mhm.
data stack. But for big companies, I mean, I just don't know how you go into a big company and you say, "Yeah, I understand you're all Microsoft or you're all Oracle, but you know what? You need to rip out you need to rip out just the BI tool because our BI tool is better." It's just a very hard argument to make
Yeah,
versus, "Hey, we're going to go in. We have a complete offering for you, and it's better than your legacy vendor's complete offering, and you're going to move everything over to us." That is the type of enterprise sale that I think that's the type of thing. I mean, it's hard. Even that is hard, right? Because you've got so much built up in an enterprise. But it is in order to do business at the enterprise, that's just what you need to be able to do, right? You don't you
exactly.
yeah, you can't go in with a point solution anymore. You need to have a comprehensive offering that can do everything they're looking for.
Well,
Um,
there's 2 ways to define enterprise as well. I was talking with a company yesterday, because normally when I think enterprise, I'm thinking like number of employees, size of company,
yeah,
and that's how I think most, um, tech tools define their enterprise sales. But you can also do it by deal size because I've seen a lot of enterprise sales try to go in and do a land and expand where they're like, "Well, we'll land in this small, part of the enterprise, this small team, and we'll try to prove our value in this team and hopefully, break barriers and expand to other teams." And that technically would be enterprise by a lot of definitions, but you could also just say it's based on deal size because you might actually have insanely small deals by trying to break into enterprise that way and be putting tons of effort and manpower at these tiny deals and not being able to expand versus maybe you're in a medium-sized business which is willing to give you everything and maybe put some manpower there because the deal sizes could be bigger.
yeah, and you're really right when it comes to enterprise sales. That like we saw that in BI. We've had a couple waves of that, right? Where today's big BI vendor was yesterday's.
Mhm.
Tableau's the classic example. I saw them early in my career almost exclusively with marketing teams. They would go in and because the marketing teams really were drawn to the visual fidelity of Tableau. These are visual people. And so they'd buy 3 licenses of Tableau. And then 8 years later, it's like we've got the Tableau Enterprise server and we've got 2,400 seat licenses or something like that. And that was their strategy. That I do think that the kind of the closer you are to the source system, the harder that seems like it would be. But I think you've seen companies like Fivetran have some success going in and being able to say, well, look, we make connecting really easy. So those things that you struggle connecting with to those systems that your IT team says, oh, we can't pull data from that.
Yeah.
Fivetran can go in and say, yes, we can.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've been, I hadn't been a Fivetran customer before, to be frank, because none of the data teams I led were giant. Even when I was leading some data teams at JP Morgan, my team was fairly small. It's not like I was leading data at JP Morgan.
Yeah.
So we were doing build it yourself. We were doing DIY, build some mainframe connectors and whatnot. But I can see that, with the 700 plus connectors that this isn't a Fivetran commercial, it's just something I've learned that
Yeah.
with all the variety of data, it's become so much more complex. Like you're pulling data from TikTok and from SharePoint and from all these unstructured data sources, plus, Salesforce, which we all know is kind of a nightmare to pull data from. And if you can just hit the easy button and do that, it's a lot easier than trying to build a DIY pipeline for all of these sources.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's So we'll have to see how the market evolves, and see what sort of acquisitions happen going forward. I get asked a lot. I will tell you by people saying, "Okay, what's going to happen to the BI tools? Who's going to buy who?"
Mhm.
And
Right.
my answer is, I have some ideas, right, um, about who might be interested in buying whom, but we'll see. That like the relationship between Sigma and Snowflake is very close, but Sigma has hit the
Yep.
point where they're going to be an expensive acquisition.
Mhm.
I think they passed 100 million ARR recently, and so it would not be a discount buy to pick up Sigma. And you've got Databricks. They seem quite committed to building their own. Like they don't, they, from what I can tell, get into different lines of business with their own homegrown technology, and they've done the same thing in BI. And so, otherwise, we'll just have to see, right? But I think it's safe to assume that a lot of the kind of mid-sized players over the course of the next 3 years will become part of the bigger players, and we'll just have to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, it's gonna be so interesting to see.
All right, so that concludes the news. Andrew, I am kind of curious. So you you've got a couple book projects underway. Um, why don't we talk about those a little bit? So what are the two books that you're writing?
Yeah, with Fivetran, I'm writing the data transformation, the definitive guide. That's going to be published by O'Reilly. Should have some early release chapters coming out soon, and then I'm writing AI ready data for Wiley.
So first of all, I want to commend you for your bravery for writing two books at once.
Yeah, I would
Writing,
say ignorance, and
yeah. Writing one is alone is a challenge.
Mhm.
So let me ask you this: it's quite common you see people say, "Hey, if your AI, if your data is not good, then your AI is not going to be any good." Right. And so let's start there. How true is that statement?
Depends how you define good. So every AI system has different data needs. From visual AI systems to, like, you and I are old enough to remember when deep learning was really kind of what we meant when we said AI. Now we've got LLMs and then multimodal models. There definitely are trade-offs to the type of data, but good means different things in every one of those systems.
Yeah, so it's really a question of you need to match, you need to have the right data for what you're trying to do, as opposed to, and that's been, look, that's always been true. That's always been true. The way you prepare data for market basket analysis is not exactly the same as the way you prepare data for financial analysis. They're not identical, and it seems like it's going to be the same for AI. So let's say you're in a position and you've been told, we got to get our data ready for AI.
Mhm.
What what are the first things you should do? Or like what's the obvious low-hanging fruit? Okay, I've been given this general order. The data has to be ready for AI. Where do I start?
Yeah, that actually did happen to me when I was leading data at an institution that shall not be named, and
Hmm.
they signed an agreement with OpenAI really early. They were the first educational institution to sign an agreement with OpenAI, and so then it was a top-down initiative of, hey, do AI, rather than a bottoms up of, hey, we would like to do these things. So the first thing you have to do is understand, like, what's the business case? When we say do AI, like, what are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? Um, and coming up with guardrails and how we're going to measure this, because we've all seen that clickbaity MIT headline that 95% of AI projects fail or agents fail, whatever it was. Well, I would say probably they didn't have a business case with realistic metrics laid out. That's and just seeing that in the wild, that it's like, hey, we're doing AI. I'm like, okay, well, how are we? What does that mean, and how are we measuring it? Um, it's like doing a marketing campaign without really understanding how you're going to measure it on the back end. So that's the first thing. So you start with the business use case and then how you want to measure it, and then you move into figuring out the models. Like, okay, based on our use case, what are the different types of models or different types of AI that we could use to do this? Does it need to be an LLM, or could we do it with something much simpler? And if so, what are the trade offs? Like, could we just do classical machine learning, or do we really need to use an LLM? And if we need to use an LLM, are we trying to build this on our own? Are we trying to just use a foundational model and then fine tune it? Or are we just going to buy an OpenAI key and that's what our AI is? So figuring all of that out. So after all those questions have kind of been answered, then you move into the data aspect of, okay, we've decided this is the model approach we're going to take for our AI because it aligns with our business use case and the measurable outcome that we're looking for. What role does our data need to have? So I think the first thing you have to do is like catalog what data is actually available to us. And once you know what data is available to you, then you go through kind of your checklist of quality and accuracy, relevance, quantity, diversity, all of these things to figure out like is the quality of the data going to align with what we need within this AI system? So those are like a couple quick hits that I would do.
And then when it comes to AI, do you see I see a lot of talk about, oh, AI is going to unlock unstructured data. Like like we've been forever, we've known there's all this value in unstructured data, but it's just been too hard to get out, right? Do you see like do you buy that? Is that really suddenly your library of text documents is going to be truly usable for analytics in a way that it never was before?
Maybe I haven't seen that necessarily in practice at scale. So being able to embed unstructured data, text documents, for instance, can be an unlock, but it's also hard and expensive to do. So there's a trade off there. I think a lot of companies are really surprised when they realize their embeddings are like 2 to 3 times the size of the actual data. And it's difficult to do. So it can be an unlock, which is why it's so important to go through that exercise of what's my business use case, what's the AI model, like what type of AI am I trying to build, what role does data play in that AI system. Now let's break down, okay, now what characteristics does my data need to have to support that AI? Because you may, if you're trying to build like a giant, enterprise wide chat bot, you really need such a breadth of AI, and now your risks are so high versus like a small agent, proof of concept where maybe we can just have some really specific sales data that we can anonymize and keep secure. And maybe we can do embeddings on those. Maybe we don't need to. But I think the unlock more comes from um, some of the data technology. For instance, Apache Iceberg enables table formats over historically unstructured data.
Yeah, that's we got a couple comments here. So Ramona says, I think this is in regard to your answer about how to think about structuring data for AI. She says, I'm 100% behind Andrew's answer. So that's high praise in my book. I love Ramona. And she says, there's a severe lack of education on the decision maker's part. FOMO is not a strategy.
That's right.
Yeah. And it does seem, do you think, I mean, let me ask you this. It was definitely the case a year and a half ago that like we just have to do AI was something
Mhm.
that was coming down from leadership. Do you think that's still the case, or have they are they starting to learn that look, just do AI is not actually it's gonna burn a lot of money, but we're not actually gonna get anything out of it?
Uh, I th- I think now the ask is do AI better.
Yeah.
So you're like still do it, but maybe get
Yeah.
us some ROI on the back of that
Yeah.
AI. So I think the fun times are gone, but I think the ask is still do AI, but I think there's also an ask to have some kind of measurable ROI on the back end at this point.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe that means if you're someone in an organization where that's an opportunity for you, I would say. If you can be the person to answer the question, hey, do some AI with ROI. If you're the person
Mhm.
who comes up with that, I think this is a huge career opportunity for you. Um,
Exactly.
Michael says unstructured text data for sure, but it's basically just the same thing as sentiment analysis, which has been
Mhm.
around forever. And I think we see
Yes.
that a lot, right? Like a lot of what we want to do with AI is like, oh, well, let's do LLMs to solve these problems that actually we always could solve. They were solved problems in a lot of ways. Maybe LLMs give us a different way to approach it, but or more powerful in some ways. But like it's not like, to your point earlier, deep learning existed, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we're able to do a lot with AI and machine learning technologies before LLMs.
Yeah, and I think how we interact with it is a lot better with LLMs. Now we can ask questions of our data.
Right.
There's trade-offs there. I remember at a large financial institution, we were using Google's BERT model to do, unstructured text analysis across um, every channel where you can imagine there'd be text, so email, text messages, in a variety of different languages. So we could do the sentiment analysis there and identify a bunch of different risks and the level of risk, but we couldn't ask further questions. It really could just flag it and tell us what's the probability that this text contains this type of risk. Now we could potentially put an LLM on top of that and say, ask further questions. Why is this a risk? Or tell me more about this risk, or has this happened in the past? And so there's an unlock there of further interactivity, especially among maybe less technical users.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think it opens up access to the data itself.
Yeah, and that's well, you mentioned kind of the multi-model systems earlier. I mean, that's one thing, kind of the LLM as the face, for lack of a better word, but maybe not relying on it to, relying on more classical systems to do a lot of the analysis, and using the LLM to interpret the user intent and provide the instruction set to the more classical analytical techniques is something that I think there's a lot of potential for um, going forward. So, okay, so you're also writing the definitive guide to data transformation. What you know, it, I've what is like the cutting edge of data transformation like nowadays? We was the ETL days. That's when I started, and then we said no, we're going to swap a couple of letters around, and that's now we ELT. What do things look like at the cutting edge of data transformation today?
I think it's balancing streaming and batch driven processing at the same time. So like Paul Dudley doing awesome things over at StreamCap with the
Shout out to
Kappa
Paul.
architecture. Shout out Paul. Kappa architecture replaced Lambda because now you're kind of treating all data, whether it's streaming or batch, essentially the same. So then you're able to handle them uniformly. But being able to create like a really efficient architecture that whether you're doing streaming or batch processing, you're able to do effective, scalable data transformation on top of that. So I think it's the same story of, hey, software engineering has all these best practices of scalability, reproducibility. We want to bring that to data. We need to do that in a way that it can handle all of our data.
How do you choose between streaming and batch?
I'm biased towards batch because you can get micro batch down to 5 minutes. So it's based on the business use case for me. Um, there's in my experience, and it may just be my ignorance, I've almost never had to use streaming for a use case, but I've also never been over something where I'm building like a real time risk identification, maybe like credit card risk, fraud, or like in games I think there's cheating risk that needs to happen real time. um, in machine learning and analytics, almost nothing needs to be real time. And so batch is actually much easier in general, much less complicated to manage, especially if you get a good transformation framework that can handle, make it idempotent, do incremental modeling at scale and logical. So I'm biased towards that, but if you have a use case that does require streaming, that's when I recommend, break out the
You, so
Kafka.
you, you used a $1 million word there, item potent. Can you define that for our audience? I think a lot of people haven't heard that one.
Yeah, so item potency is that you will get the same result if you give the same input. So think of it like a function. So you want your pipelines to be able to produce the same result, the same output if you're giving them the same input. And you don't want any variance in that. Let me give you an example. So, like if you're doing a select star, if you have select star in your pipeline logic, now you're relying on however the database or the underlying storage system interprets your select star, and your output could be different each time. If I run it one day, it could be different from the other day. So you want to be a lot more declarative and say, okay, this is exactly how I want my output to look like, so that every time I run this, on the same data with the same function, I'm going to get the same type of output. So it's really
Gotcha.
eliminating variability.
Yeah. So it's you provide an instruction set, and you will always get the same result with the same instruction set.
Hmm. Exactly.
We do have a comment from Michael here. He says, upskilling and learning DBT to contribute and build pipelines has been great to add value as a BI developer, have the full context of client and internal needs, and can get the data there. Michael, I think you're on to what BI developers need to be learning right now. I predict that a lot of what we've classically done, which is, hey, someone's got to build this dashboard, like machines are going to get pretty good at that pretty fast. They already are. Where the BI person has a unique ability in my mind is what you're talking about. It's having the full context of the client and the internal needs, and being kind of the human face of everything that goes into data. At BI, the BI layer, we work very directly with end users all day, and that is kind of your superpower, Michael. And so being able to learn more of the full process, and then be the person who can bring your superpower to that full process, I think is very smart. All right. So we've got about 5 minutes left. So Andrew, first of all, I want to thank you for being a great guest, and our first guinea pig on the new show format here. So thanks for joining me for it. It's been a lot of fun. So thinking about where we are in data right now, I am curious. Say someone's entering the field, or a young person entering the field, or it's still a very attractive field to join. So a lot of people who are not in data say, "Oh, I want to get into data." What's the first thing they should focus on?
I would focus on a use case that interests you. Super basic. I would like don't think of a problem that's like really complex. Think of like a basic use case that interests you and try to address it through data using LLMs. Um, in order to write whatever code and create your dashboards and whatnot, and use the LLMs to help you learn, because it's never been more easy to learn, because you can have it help you write the SQL, help you write the Python, whatever it is, but also explain it to you. So awesome. It's really, if you use it right, you can do it like pair programming. So that would be my recommendation, is like end to end, try to build a project and ask really detailed and thoughtful questions along the way of the LLM, so that you really understand, oh, here's what's going on in the database. Oh, here's how I'm orchestrating this pipeline. Or, oh, here's why the SQL's written this way. Because now you've got a private tutor and you can really learn in depth.
That's great advice. We have a question from Ramona. She says, "I'd like to hear Andrew's thoughts on agentic and context layer."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the context is incredibly important, because too little context and now it's useless, right? Now you're just using a foundational model without the context of your question. Too much context, now we're experiencing data leakage. We're giving out like the CEO salary and we shouldn't, or it's just not being able to provide the right answers. So a larger context window actually is not always helpful. Spice AI, open source product, has done some really great write-ups on this. So, and hopefully this is what Ramon is referring to, but the context layer really needs to align with the specific business use case, and also with security and authentication, all those things. So I like to think of context in the terms of like role-based access. What exactly does this role need to answer XYZ questions, and only providing the context for that role.
And it's really, yeah. I mean, I think it's like, look, this is a thing that we've always known, that just providing more data, say, to our human end users, does not improve their outcomes, right? We really have to give them the right data in the right context at the right time in order to do that. And it's not very different with these LLMs. Just saying, oh, like what Sonnet 4.5 came out yesterday or the day before, and the context window is gigantic, and so it's like, oh, I can put in a whole book. Well, you can, right? But is that going to give you the best result? And the early returns I've heard is like, some people are saying, yeah, it worked great, and other people are like, no, 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 no. it actually made it worse than what I was doing before. And so it's just a classic, like more is not always better when it comes to the context. You have to have the right context is the key.
Exactly. Yeah. I found with the AI, it's really helpful to once a conversation starts getting too long and you start seeing a little bit of hallucination in there, it's not as helpful. Having it summarize in like a markdown file, its exact learnings, like what we've done up to that point, and then starting a new chat. And it's like
Yeah.
and uploading that file, like, here's where we're at. Now let's start over and reset that context window.
I mean, listen, I think that right there, if you take one thing away from this episode, I think that is the true pro tip because I think those of us who've worked with these systems we've all hit that point where you're talking to it and it's just forgetting stuff, that you told it 20 chats ago, and at that point it's time to kind of clear the decks and
Exactly.
restart. All right, a couple last comments here, and then we're going to wrap things up. Ramona says that's the hard part. What are we constraining on each specific instance, right? I mean, that's the art of it, right, Ramona? That's where we add value, is our ability to do that. And then Michael asked, what do you think the main bottleneck for AI adoption is in the context of a data team? Is it user adoption? Is it hallucination? What's standing in the way?
It's training, to be honest. It's not involving the end users in the AI program from the beginning and defining the business case and the measurable outcomes. We're building these things in a silo a lot of times and then saying, hey, use this.
Yeah.
And then it's just not working. So it's really that change management, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think I will tell you one thing I noticed with data teams is a lot of times the way I see a lot of them using AI right now is kind of like interactive Stack Overflow.
Yes.
And it's great for that. Don't get me wrong. When it's like, man, I can't figure out this SQL, you figure it out. It can do that, right? I personally am not great at Python, uh, and it was just godsend, right, to have
Mhm.
this buddy who's great at writing Python for me. But you know, involving the users earlier and involving the AI earlier, right? Like I find it enormously useful for scoping or problem space exploration or that sort of thing. And I see a lot of data teams failing to really use it for that, which I think is a huge mistake. All right, Andrew, we're going to wrap things up. Thanks for joining me here today. Um, what, first of all, any idea when people can get the books?
You should get some early release chapters of the data definitive guide to data transformation here, probably, I guess, about a month, and Wiley probably next year.
Okay, great. And then if people want to follow up with you, where can they keep track of you and connect?
Yeah, you can send me angry comments on LinkedIn. So feel free to send me angry DMs.
Yeah, that is definitely the place. All right, Andrew, thanks for joining me today. It's been really good having you.
Thanks, Ryan. Good to see you.
All right, bye. Man, what a great guest he is. I've been wanting to have him on for a while, so it was great to finally get him on here. Listen, you've been a great audience. Special thanks to Ramona and Michael for the great questions, and good to see you again here on the Super Data Brothers show. Before I let you go, I do need to thank our sponsor, Good Data. Good Data is actually one of the vendors who moved the most in the 2025 Gartner Magic Quadrant for analytics and business intelligence. So do check them out at gooddata.com to see what's going on there. I think really exciting developments, especially in terms of what Good Data is able to do a lot of what we talked about when it comes to AI assistance in your analytics stack. So check them out. Get your copy of the MQ for analytics and BI and visit gooddata.com. Thanks again to Good Data for sponsoring today's show. All right, next week on deck, there's a couple of things we might be doing. I don't want to spoil them, so check here for announcements on what next week's topic might be. Eric will be joining us. I will be in Prague for the Good Data Global Offsite, so I'll be broadcasting from there. So take care, everybody. Thanks for joining me today on Super Data Brothers Show, and we'll see you next week. Same time as always, 12 o'clock Eastern time. Until then, I'm Ryan. Take care, everybody. Bye.